So this is some work that we've been doing in Exeter. At Exeter we have this large project called SWEEP. The acronym I've long since given up trying to remember. What we do in SWEEP and what we do in Exeter more generally is work with local businesses, government agencies or the environment agencies on ways to incorporate natural capital ecosystem service thinking into business plans or project management ideas to incorporate the natural environment into business planning, government planning, in order to get better outcomes for people and for the environment. That's our modus operandi, that's our mandate in Exeter. So this project is all about how we can manage our coastal ecosystems, our coastal habitats, to get bigger and better ecosystem services for lower cost to society, basically. So a lot of work we do, the work we do in Exeter, as it is here, is really highly collaborative. At Exeter, we are the Land, Environment, Economics and Policy Institute. So for most of you, the top row of faces will be familiar. So Ian Bateman is on the far left. So he's the head of our group. Ian, for those of you who were around in 2013, gave the Henry Schapper lecture. So, and he's also an honorary fellow or an adjunct professor with ARE. So Amy Binner, Brett Day might be familiar for, again, many of you, and Greg Smith. So this is Team Exeter at the top. And then we've been working with local government, the North Devon Biosphere, and then we're working with some physical geographers and general marine scientists at the University of Plymouth. So the work that I'm going to present for you today is all about Saltmarsh. It took a long time for me, coming from Queensland, to think of Saltmarsh as something that was not a mangrove. And I had to do a lot of research into what these systems actually look like. So for those of you who have not seen Saltmarsh, you're about to find out more than you may have ever wanted to know about Saltmarsh. So Saltmarshes are tidal systems. This is a big importance. So as you can see, the tide comes in and floods different areas along, we call this a bank, somewhere which has different levels of elevation. And depending on how tolerant to salt, to salinity they are, you get different species. So salt marshes, along with most of our other coastal ecosystems, are heavily degraded around the world. We think we've lost about 50% of them. In the UK, we're losing about 100 hectares per year. Is coming. So, before I tell you the problems, I will tell you the benefits. So, salt marsh is wonderful for so many reasons. Along with a lot of other coastal ecosystems, we think it prevents coastal erosion and helps with flood defence. So, in the UK, this is more problematic. It's a tiny island nation. Different scale to Australia, but a tiny island nation, and sea level rise is projected to increase maybe up to 1 metre in the next 100 years. And of course, coasts in the UK, like coasts in Australia, attract lots of settlement, agriculture, industry. Everyone wants to be on the coast. So coastal erosion and flood protection is important. Bird watching. Do we have any keen birders in this group? Possibly. Right, 1 or 2 in the closet, yeah, I see a few knowing smiles. So salt marsh are an important habitat for a lot of nesting birds, for a lot of migratory birds, for them to make their nests in, and bird watchers, I have been told, like salt marsh areas because you are guaranteed to see lots of birds. Salt marsh is also important for grazing. I don't know, it's probably not a thing in Western Australia. So you can get a price premium on salt marsh grazed lamb. Another important benefit, one of my honours students has been looking at this, so salt marsh provides really important nursery benefits for fish. So small fish go into the salt marsh, protected from predators, enabling them to get bigger and for us to exploit them commercially. So we were interested in this study in being able to quantify these benefits. There are some existing numbers. This is probably most relevant for Louise and Abby. So we think we've got a lot of numbers on the ecosystem services provided by Saltmarsh for the US. East Coast US, they do a lot of work with Saltmarsh. So we think we can quantify, put some kind of economic number to flood protection, to bird watching, to recreational benefits. We certainly can put some kind of number against the price premiums you can get for grazing. And the work that my master's student has done suggests that anywhere up to 20% of current UK commercial landings have some benefit from salt marsh. What are the problems? We have lots of things affecting salt marsh. Sea level rise, we have problems with coastal squeeze, agricultural development, land reclamation, pollution, problems with water pollution. There's a lot of processes working in isolation and in conjunction to degrade these habitats. Big one in the UK is conversion to agriculture. So we put up a seawall and we drain the salt marsh, or we allow it to become a freshwater system. So, given that in Exeter we work with local business and local government agencies to work out how they can incorporate natural capital into their daily routines, in this project we were interested in understanding where are the benefits provided by salt marsh greatest relative to the costs of creating new salt marsh areas. So for salt marsh in the UK, if we're creating more salt marsh, we're typically talking about managed realignment. I don't know if the terminology is the same in Australia. No, managed realignment is a big thing in the UK. So managed realignment effectively means knocking a hole in a seawall and allowing the saline water to come through. It can be more or less exciting than that, but the cheapest ones are literally on purpose or accidentally allowing a hole to form in existing seawalls and saline water comes through. So then we transition from a freshwater habitat to a saltwater habitat and we get these salt marsh species. So we were not just interested in prioritising managed realignment across the UK. In Exeter, we're really focused on the southwest. So this is where most of our research is based at the moment, southwest and Wales. So I don't know if anyone has had the rare privilege to be walking in the North Devon Biosphere Reserve for our UK people. So North Devon is this little chunk here, and this is the Biosphere Reserve within North Devon. Has anyone worked with the Biosphere down south? So we have a biosphere in WA. So the idea of biosphere is that they're areas which have important environmental value, and they've got a close community living in and around these environmental areas, and we want to work on ways to integrate the two for more sustainable futures. So in North Devon, this is where our study site is. Everything in the red outline is the North Devon Biosphere, and we're specifically interested in salt marsh that occurs along the estuaries. No one's going to know if I get these mixed up. I'm going to call this the Tor, I'm going to call this the Torridge. And so all of our salt marsh occurs in these areas. What you can also see, hopefully, is that there's some really big population centres around these areas. So when we're thinking about managed realignment, we don't just get to knock holes in seawalls everywhere. We have to be quite careful about where we plant them. So this is now a closer snapshot to the area I was showing you. This is our Tor and this is our Torridge estuary. In the yellow, this is the salt marsh we think we had. And in the red, this is the salt marsh that we now have. So we've lost about 750 hectares. So we've lost, I think, it's about 3/4 of what the salt marsh that we used to have. So the managers of the North Devon Biosphere Reserve are wanting to create new salt marsh areas, and they want to do so in areas where you're going to get more benefits from the salt marsh you create, and you're not going to be flooding people's houses or having huge impacts on agricultural productivity. So our mandate in this project was to go forth and find areas where salt marsh could be created that were going to maximise these benefits relative to these costs. So this was a really GIS intensive project. I've learned that you can do all things GIS in R. So what we're hoping from this analysis is to be able to roll it out across the UK. Most of the data sets that we used were UK based. So what we did was we identified areas where we think salt marsh could form. For this, we actually used one of the data sets provided by the Environment Agency. We were estimating opportunity costs to agricultural production. We're thinking about the costs of knocking holes in seawalls and potential property damages. In terms of the benefits, salt marsh provides a range of ecosystem service benefits. We focused on carbon and recreational. And from that, we were able to find some priority areas for managed realignment. So this was our set of Canada areas that could be turned into saltmarsh. So there's 57 areas. In theory, there should be some benefit then from a systematic prioritization versus a spreadsheet-based approach. You can see that they're really different in size. So for the Biosphere Reserve, if they're thinking about where they should be planning managed realignment, there's a real difference in looking at sites in the north, or where a lot of the population is, and there's fewer people. These areas around here are less heavily populated. So most of the areas that we would think about managed realignment, they're about 15 hectares. It's hard. On a UK scale, that's relatively large. Probably doesn't count as large on an Australian scale. No. So one of the big things we did was looking at, so North Devon is very agricultural, not very productive, but it is very agricultural. So there's a lot of dairy farms, there's some chicken farms, there's sort of not very valuable grazing areas. What we wanted to do to estimate areas, well, what would be opportunity cost to agricultural production, we went back to a classification system that was developed in the 80s. I don't know, Ben, Michael, did you ever cut your teeth on this?
As an agric student, that was like
Yep.
built into you.
Yeah, that would have been your data set, I think.
So grade one is you can grow potatoes on it, basically. That was always my rule of thumb.
And no potatoes there.
I should have just sent you an email, Ben. I was like, what is this system? So the agricultural land classification, they have, in the 80s, they took data on soil types and climate data and came up with a classification to divide agricultural land by its potential productivity. So we think, we try not to do nasty things on grade 2 agricultural land, or grade 1 because it's more productive. We're less concerned about grade 5 because it's less productive. So for us, we were interested in locating managed realignment areas in this less productive land. Yeah, that was pretty much exactly what we did. So we took sale price data from 2006. Again, we're working with really up-to-date numbers, but we normalized everything to 2016 prices. So we're always looking at annualized streams of benefits across all of our costs and benefits. The next thing that we did, we had to be really careful when we were thinking about property damages. I haven't personally been lynched, but a few of my colleagues have been lynched in the north of Devon because a farmer up there accidentally let one of his seawalls collapse, and it's become a really politicised issue. Who would have thought that managed realignment could be so politically charged? But when we're talking about managed realignment around habitated areas, you have to be really careful now in North Devon to make sure that there's no properties are going to be damaged by your plans, and that any changes in flood risk are well communicated. So what we did in this analysis, we had 3 scenarios, different ways of thinking about property damages. As you can see, the first one, we just pretended like they didn't exist. So if we had 2 sites, one of which had properties in it and the other one didn't, we just carried on as per normal. We had a second approach which said we wouldn't consider any sites with properties in them as being too difficult. And then we had a third approach where we looked at what our property damages would be if we flooded the area for Saltmarsh. So again, in the UK, you can get quite good house price data. I don't know if we must have that data set here. So we took all the properties in our managed realignment sites, looked at the average house prices per postcode, and then were able to get a rough estimate of the property values within each site. Then so those were the costs that we thought of looking at. We looked at agricultural opportunity cost to agriculture. We thought about direct costs of knocking holes in seawalls, and we thought about property damages. For the benefits, we had a bit of a head start. I don't know if anyone's used ORVAL before or seen it. Ian will be disappointed. So this is the outdoor recreational valuation tool. It is based on survey data that could be collected annually, not really sure. It's based on a survey that is given to everyone visiting a national park in the UK and the survey has been administered for a number of years now. So they have this incredible data set of visitation, everything from where people have come from, how long they've spent, money spent on food, etc. And what Brett Day and Greg Smith have done has been to turn that into a model of a travel cost model of the benefits, the recreational benefits to UK households of every single patch of green anything in the UK.
But it was only a new city national park.
Ah, yeah, good point. No, it must have been done for everything. Not quite sure. Could find out for you though. So Orval says anything from football pitches to small grassy patches. What do we expect? It models what we think the recreational value will be to households. So we can model the benefits that new saltmarsh areas would provide if they were converted into saltmarsh. So this tool has just been developed for the Environment Agency, and it's been live for a couple of years now. So what that gave us was a range of recreational value to UK households every year. The important points to note is that recreational value is highest closest to people. So if you have population centres, you're going to have higher recreational values. So this is one of the larger cities, Barnstable, and less habitated areas. The next thing that we were looking at in this analysis was carbon sequestration benefits. I probably should have consulted with people here because you've probably done better estimates than we did. What we were really interested in, though, was saying we don't want to just assume that saltmarsh provides carbon sequestration benefits out of thin air. If you're going to change a piece of land to saltmarsh, you have to accept that you're losing whatever carbon was locked up in the soil already, or whatever carbon emissions or sequestration benefits were existing. So we took data on current land use. We looked at different types of carbon emissions from different grazing systems, different crops, and then we also looked at sequestered carbon stock according to the different land uses. So I'd be interested to see what other people did. We assumed that if you changed a given unit of area, this is North Devon, to saltmarsh, then everything in the soil would be, all the carbon in the soil would be mobilised and would be emitted.
What would you assume?
We wanted to be conservative.
Because saltmarsh is holding a lot of it.
So then we said, if it goes to saltmarsh, we're going to assume that it accretes or it sequesters carbon at a higher rate for the first 15 years. And then we thought that we would probably reach some kind of equilibrium. So we thought if you've got a stable system and saltmarsh is neither accreting nor being eroded away, that you're going to have some kind of, there's going to be some equilibrium period where you're no longer sequestering carbon. So we've got a lower bound, basically, on carbon sequestration benefits. So we looked at the difference for what was happening with carbon with previous land use and what would happen to carbon with saltmarsh. Looked at marginal abatement costs, and again, we converted this into an annualised stream of benefits. Are they particularly small? They are particularly small, aren't they? Can you see this? So these were our results then. So we wanted to be able to take some unit area of land back to the North Devon Biosphere managers and say, we think that you should manage realignment in this area. So if we ignored property damages, we think we could get an annualised stream of benefits of just £185,000. If you ignored property, if you excluded all sites from the analysis that had properties in them.
Does that mean 185 by converting all those areas?
No, just that one.
Oh, just that one?
Yep, sorry.
Why that one? Is that the one of the highest?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. So that's our prime candidate for managed realignment. If you ignore the fact that there's some properties in there, and assume that there's no cost involved with properties. If you again, you can see. You may remember where our recreational benefits were highest, and you can see that all of our sites which we are prioritising for managed realignment occur really close to where Barnstable is, where we get the highest recreational benefits. So agricultural cost to agriculture didn't really drive a lot of our prioritisation. It was mainly recreation and property values. So, if we think about property damages, they're high enough that we have the same result when we incorporate some measure of property damages as when we just exclude properties outright. So if you're thinking about value of information to planners, probably wasn't worth the weeks of complicated GIS analysis I did to find out where properties, the value of properties, and not choose those sites. Really, you could just exclude areas that had properties in them, because politically, you're not going to get managed realignment in areas where there's properties anyway. So there's not a big difference, but yeah, you'd have some costs associated with choosing the wrong area here from ignoring properties. What we found is that, you know, was it worth the time we spent doing this analysis? Could the managers have just randomly chosen managed realignment site and thought, woohoo? No, there is some benefits from prioritization. This is sites in the top right corner are the best sites with the highest annualized net present value on the vertical axis. So top right in purple is when we ignore property damages. Top right in the other colours are when we think about property damages. Important thing to note is that it's not a horizontal line. So do you choose a site for managed realignment at random? No. Did you need to think about property damages, or could you just have a quick decision rule to ignore property damages? Yeah, you could do that. So in terms of what we can do for the North Devon Biosphere managers, is we can go back to them and say, we think that you should prioritise managed realignment in one of these red areas, because regardless of what happens to properties, your treatment of property damages, they're always going to be really good areas to do managed realignment in. The yellow areas were prioritised across 2 scenarios, and the green areas were also prioritised across 2 scenarios. There's some discussion that people want to know what the benefits are if you think about a per metre squared approach, so a sort of heat map for where you generate the highest benefits from managed realignment per metre squared. You're never going to be able to do partial managed realignment because you'd have to do so much other you'd have to put so much other infrastructure in place. It's not really useful to think about it from a metre squared perspective. But you can see they're all roughly clustered around the same areas in this upper patch of North Devon. So then our findings for this one, we go back to the Biosphere and we say, we think you should do managed realignment in one of these 4 areas. We think you can get an annualized flow of benefits somewhere around between 150 and 185,000 pounds. For most of our scenarios, you really, of course, it's a feature of the data that we included. You're really thinking about recreational value. So if you're looking for decision rules in North Devon for where you should do managed realignments, don't do it where there are properties, and do it close to population centres. So as close to people as you possibly can, but not in someone's backyard. What we're doing in the future is we're going out into North Devon and getting an idea of the tidal hydrodynamics, the geomorphology. So we're going to be picking up what happens to the tidal range and what happens with salinity. And we're doing that so that we can predict what kind of salt marsh is actually going to form. So you could knock a hole in the seawall and you wouldn't get enough tidal inundation to actually have salt marsh form. So the physical geographers look at our analysis and say it's fine from an economic perspective, but we don't really know if we'd actually get salt marsh in any of these areas. So now we go back and say we're going to work out what will happen with the tides, and that should let us pick what happens with the vegetation that's going to form. So this is terrestrial vegetation that doesn't like salt. You get these early successional species down here, the first to form. As you get less inundations per period, you get different vegetation. So that's the next step in our analysis. Get this information and then plug it back into our prioritization. So the next, we have a working paper based on this, and it's just been accepted into a natural capital special feature in the Journal of Environmental Economics and Policy. The next thing that we're doing is looking, so I'll be interested to see if anyone's doing some similar work in coastal systems. We're looking at this integrated land-sea modelling. I don't know if I know in Brisbane that people are starting to touch on this theme. we're interested in taking a policy change and then looking what happens to land use decisions. So another of the big tools that we have at Exeter is the National Environmental Evaluation online. They wanted it to say NEVO. So NEVO is the new tool, and that says what happens to agricultural production, recreational benefits, another suite of ecosystem services if land use changes. So we're interested in, from the agricultural perspective, if we have different land use decisions, we have different fertiliser rates for our cropping areas, and we have different use of antibiotics for us when we're for our stock. And that impacts our coastal water quality, which is something that we're really interested in at the moment. Coastal water quality we care about in North Devon, mainly because we have people swimming, and North Devon is a massive tourism centre for the UK. So the bathing water quality is really pertinent for all the waste management companies. They have to make sure that the beaches aren't closed because of pollutants. And we're also concerned because we think we could have shellfish industries in the southwest if we didn't have problems with coastal water quality. So our idea then is to model these land use changes, follow it through with our fertiliser and antibiotic rates, and then work out what could happen to a shellfish industry and what trade-offs we'd have to have between land and sea. What kind of sacrifices do we have to make on land in order to get benefits for a shellfish industry? And also, what's the human exposure and what impact does that have on illness if we have antimicrobial resistant bacteria in our bathing water? Whew, I'm going to finish it there. So thanks everyone very much.